back to another video on human nutrition, and in this video we're going to be talking about nutrition that affects fertility and affects pregnancy. So what would you choose? Which of the following meals would you choose as the best source of iron for a pregnant vegetarian? Spinach salad with hard-boiled eggs and a whole wheat roll, lean hamburger with cheese, lettuce, and tomato and roasted red potatoes, and then beans and cheese, soft taco, and stewed tomatoes. So obviously you're not going to go for the lean hamburger if you're looking at a meal for a pregnant vegetarian. But then would the best meal be a spinach salad or a bean and cheese taco? So we're going to go through this information, and maybe you'll be able to pick the best meal for them a little bit later on. Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot the last one, which is a Kellogg's product. It's called Smart Start cereal with fat-free milk and orange juice. So nutrition and fertility, obviously very important. The interesting thing is there's a lot more people nowadays who are experiencing fertility problems than ever before. So the incidence of infertility in both males and females is on the rise, not just in the United States, but really around the world. So we're going to talk about how is energy balance related to fertility. We're also going to talk about a big fertility issue, which is called polycystic ovarian syndrome, and then what hormonal changes are involved in this PCOS, how do they affect fertility, and then we're going to talk about nutrients that have been linked to fertility. Okay, so surprise, we're pregnant, okay, which of course is something that happens to people, but only about half of all pregnancies are planned, okay? So sometimes it's a surprise, sometimes obviously not so much of a surprise. And women often do not suspect they're pregnant, at least for the first few weeks, and sometimes even longer. You may be talking as many as the first few months. A woman may not have any idea that she's pregnant. A medical attention, because if you're talking about 3-4 months into the pregnancy, it could be very much delayed. So infertility occurs in about 15% of those who are trying or planning a pregnancy. So they don't have the ability to conceive after 1 year of unprotected intercourse. That's what we would consider infertility. Fertility of mother and father-to-be can affect the likelihood of conception. So we're not just talking mom can't get pregnant, and it's a problem that she has, but it could be that there's a problem on the part of dad. So the fertility is, there's a link between nutritional status and fertility, and there's a big link. As a matter of fact, a lot of scientists have speculated that the #1 reason for infertility is nutritional deficiencies. So we'll talk about the role of fats, the role of carbohydrates, other antioxidants that we need to consume, B vitamins, zinc, iron, even some calcium could be involved. So prolonged energy imbalance can impair fertility. And so what we mean by that is that reproductive functions, of course, require a certain amount of calories in a person's diet. And one of the real big deals about that is you need to eat certain foods in order to be able to produce the hormones necessary not only for pregnancy to occur, but then of course later on when pregnancy does occur, to keep that pregnancy going and to keep the baby healthy. Now, in order for pregnancy to occur, there has to be a normal menstrual cycle. And so some women who have infertility issues may actually not even have their period more than once a year. Okay, so obviously if you're not having a menstrual cycle, the issue of ovulation comes in, and then, of course, without an egg present, fertility isn't going to be able to occur. And then, of course, if pregnancy does occur, we need a lot of good energy in order for breastfeeding to take place. Many underweight women, and a lot of times these are women who are doing a lot of exercise, or these are women who are eating very, very low-fat diets. They're going to experience also amenorrhea, which is that lack of menstrual cycle. Now, however, let me just say this is really important for you to understand. You don't have to be underweight to experience this lack of menstrual cycle. Remember, the menstrual cycle has all to do with hormones. So we're talking estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. All of those are fat-based hormones. And so you have to have enough fat in your diet, you have to have enough fat on your body in order to be able to produce those hormones. Now, the ovaries and adipose tissue produce estrogen, okay? So in order to be able to produce enough estrogen for the body, you have to have a goodly amount, like we said, of fat on the body. And what's really happening is we're taking testosterone, believe it or not, and that testosterone is produced by the ovaries, but it's also in women produced, just like it is in men, in the adrenal glands. And that testosterone is then going to be converted into estrogen. And that can happen in the ovaries. It can also happen in adipose tissue. Now, of course, men don't have ovaries, no kidding. And so we do see men able to produce testosterone in the adipose or in the fat tissue, just like women. As a matter of fact, you may have noticed in men who are very, very obese that they kind of look like they have breasts, because one of the things that estrogen does for women is it produces the external genitalia, and of course that includes the breasts in a woman. So if a male has excess amounts of fat on his body, then what will happen is any testosterone that he's making naturally can be converted into estrogen, and then he may start to grow structures like external breasts because of this estrogen. And of course, low body fat means lower estrogen production, and of course estrogen has to do with producing that menstrual cycle that we talked about. So with low estrogen production, we have the amenorrhea. And that means that birth rates for a lot of these women are going to decline by as much as 50%. So that really affects fertility issues. Now, of course, we talked about excess exercise contributing to this low body fat, but it could be that the person has eating disorders, like we've talked about before, and it also could be a poverty issue, not enough money to be able to buy the appropriate amounts of food. Now, in order to be considered really low body fat, the BMI is usually below 20, so we need to be above 20 in order for conception to occur. But we're also going to talk about the fact that excess body fat can also produce infertility issues as well. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And that has to do with other health issues creating that excess body fat. Now for men, the low body fat also is an issue because it can decrease the necessary component to produce testosterone. And so then sex drive could decrease, sperm count can decrease, and of course that leads to infertility issues. Now with women, we've talked about excess body fat. It can affect reproductive hormones. And one of the ways that it does this is it induces an insulin resistance. Okay, so it's kind of interesting because insulin resistance really has a lot to do initially with a high glycemic index. Now we've talked about insulin resistance, we've talked about glycemic index in this class, and just kind of to refresh your memory, what happens is you have this person who is eating a lot of simple carbohydrates in their diet. And they're not just eating a lot at one setting, they're eating a lot constantly, all day long, every day. And so what's happening is they're increasing the amount of insulin that's being produced. And the more insulin that's being produced, there's really two basic things that are occurring. And one of those is when you produce a whole bunch of insulin, you decrease the person's ability to burn fat. And so we're going to store all that fat away, and now we're going to have excess body fat. The second thing that happens when I'm insulin resistant is that the receptors that bind insulin on my cells that then open up the gates to allow those nice carbohydrates to come into the cell and produce energy, those receptors get sluggish. They don't want to respond to insulin anymore. They're like, we've been doing this too much. Okay, dude, we just need to stop. And so they are resistant to insulin saying, hey, open up, open up. It's like, I don't know if you've ever had anybody just keep pounding on your door day after day after day, and you're just like, forget it. I'm not getting up and answering that door again. I've done it too many times. And that's what happens to our receptors. They're not opening the door anymore. And so then insulin, the body goes, okay, well, let's just produce more insulin, and we'll produce more insulin. We'll try to really bombard those receptors and get them to open up. And the side effect is that when insulin levels go up, it impairs the hormones that allow us to ovulate, and it also impairs the hormones that allow implantation to occur. So one of the things that has to happen is we have to lower those complex carbohydrates in the diet, and in doing so, lower the insulin levels. And hopefully, again, that will do two things for us. One, that will allow us to start to burn the fat in the body and lower the amount of fat in the body, which of course makes us very, very healthy. But when the insulin levels go down, that will increase the different hormones that allow for ovulation and implantation to occur. By the way, just kind of as a side note, when a person has insulin resistance, one of the other weird things that happens is they have these massive cravings for simple carbs. So it's like massive cravings for ice cream and chips and all that stuff that isn't so good for you because those doors won't open anymore, those gates on our cells won't open anymore, and the body is essentially starving because it can't get enough carbs into the cell in order to produce that energy. So the person's almost sort of like a carbohydrate junkie. I can't say no. I just have to keep eating and eating and eating because we need that drive to try to give the body some kind of energy. Now, by the way, another good way to make those receptors more sensitive to insulin is by exercise. Exercise seems to sensitize our receptors and make us less insulin resistant. And that exercise could be as simple as walking. So about 25% of the problems that this excess body fat it causes is with ovulation that we've been talking about that leads to infertility. With men, excess body fat increases estrogen levels and, like we said, decreases the testosterone levels, so then it decreases sex drive and sperm production. It increases, okay, now this is interesting, it increases the temperature of the testicular area, and that also helps to lead to lower sperm production. So the testicles have to be cooler than the rest of the body. But if we have excess fat on our body, that fat very nicely helps to hold heat. And that's why, animals like whales and seals and all, they have all that blubber because they're swimming in those really cold Atlantic Ocean regions. and that blubber helps to hold heat on their body. Well, same thing with our excess body fat. It can actually turn the temperature up, and unfortunately for a man, that can lower the sperm production. In both men and women, excess body fat does one other interesting thing. It leads to what we call oxidative stress. And what that does is it produces chemicals that then can damage the DNA in the egg and the sperm. Now that damage does a couple of different things. One, it can damage the egg and the sperm enough that then fertility and implantation can't occur, or it can cause damage, which then leads to damage in the unborn child. Okay, so when we're talking about hormonal balance and infertility, a really big issue that seems to be increasing in the population in women is this polycystic ovarian syndrome, or polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS. And now, cysts are like these fluid-filled little sacs, and they can occur in different places in the body. And one of the places we see these sacs starting to fill with fluid is in the ovaries when we're talking about PCOS. And you can see in this picture, these are typical eggs that will eventually ovulate, and then what will happen is they can go on to become fertile. However, any egg that should have ovulated in this area, instead, they won't burst out of the ovaries. They just fill with this fluid, and the fluid keeps increasing and increasing until you have these cysts. And so then the cysts can cause other issues, but when we're talking about infertility, the big issue is that the egg doesn't leave the ovary. So when we look at these ovaries, it's really easy to tell when you're doing an ultrasound and looking at the ovary because all of these little cysts sort of look like a strand of pearls, and I'll show you a picture in just a second. Now, what happens is in these women who have PCOS, okay, remember I told you that testosterone is supposed to be converted into estrogen. And in order to do that conversion, women need to have the appropriate enzyme to do the conversion. That enzyme is called aromatase. Now, in women with PCOS, it appears that they don't have as much of this enzyme, aromatase, and so they can't do that conversion to estrogen. And so they have more testosterone in their body than they do estrogen. And of course, now that leads to a whole bunch of other issues. Okay, so this becomes very complicated. PCOS is a real issue for infertility because I can't convert the testosterone into estrogen in the ovary. I need a lot of estrogen in order for the egg to ovulate. So if I can't convert testosterone, which is made in the ovary, into estrogen in the ovary using that enzyme aromatase, the egg is not going to ovulate. There's problem number one. Problem number two, that testosterone that I made in the ovary that wasn't converted into estrogen will now start floating around in my bloodstream and go to my fat cells. And the aromatase in my fat cells are just okie dokie okay. And now what I can do is take that excess testosterone and I can convert it to excess estrogen, and I start building estrogen up in the system. Now the issue with that is I now can produce more fat on my body. So those excess androgens also will cause more fat production, and that eventually can lead also to more insulin resistance issues. Okay? And so now all of this leads to female infertility. So when we're looking at this picture here, okay, here's a normal ovary. Well, this one actually is a little bit polycystic. So you can see where these little cysts are here and maybe here. It's not quite as clear in the left ovary, but look at the right one. It looks like a nice strand of pearls right here, one cyst after another. Whereas if you were looking at a healthy ovary, you'd see these little spots. They'd be much smaller, but they'd be more scattered throughout the ovary and not in this really nice, even kind of strand like this. And that is a clear sign that we're talking about somebody who has PCOS. So again, 2 hormone alterations are the really big one with PCOS. You're talking the person has high testosterone levels and high insulin levels. So when we talk about high testosterone levels in women, testosterone affects hair growth. So one of the big deals is that this person could have an issue called hirsutism, which means that they have a lot of facial hair, and this is what happens with men when their testosterone levels go up and they have to shave. They've got a lot of facial hair. High testosterone can also cause acne, and then it has a tendency to deposit more fat around the waist, which, by the way, is what we see with people who have insulin resistance, is they have that high testosterone, low estrogen, larger waistline. And then, of course, high insulin, like we said, that eventually causes the receptors on our cells not to respond. They turn a deaf ear, and we get insulin resistance. And of course, eventually, if the pancreas, which is where insulin is made, keeps secreting insulin all day long, every day, year after year, you can burn that poor pancreas out, and eventually you're going to increase the risk of type 2 diabetes. So we have to be obviously very careful of that. So this is just showing you some of the symptoms of PCOS. Of course, we've talked about excess facial hair, but there can be excess body hair. Weight changes. So first of all, the person usually has excess weight on their body. One of the other things we see is because there's more testosterone in a woman who has PCOS, she kind of has a more masculine looking body structure because testosterone also increases muscle mass. And so the woman can have much broader shoulders, she can be much stronger, and then of course she has a lot of trouble losing weight. She's got those ovarian cysts that are showing us that strand of pearls, low sex drive, irregular or no menstrual cycle. She could have thinning hair that leads to like a male pattern baldness, trouble conceiving, which we talked about, and that's the real big deal for us in this lecture, is the infertility. She could have very volatile moods, so up and down mood changes for no reason. We said acne. Fatigue is a really big issue too, again, because remember we talked about if the gates don't open and the glucose doesn't go in, there's no energy. And then of course the insulin resistance, the high testosterone levels. So how do we improve this issue with PCOS? Okay, so weight loss is important, but okay, here's the problem. If I am craving carbs like a junkie, how the heck am I going to lose weight with PCOS? Well, of course, we've talked about this in other videos. We're talking keto diets here, or at least what my daughters like to call the Cheeto diet, okay? And I don't mean you go out and buy Cheetos. I mean that you go on to a keto diet, and it can be kind of a quasi-keto diet. But really the big deal is you have to lower the carbohydrates in the diet of someone who has PCOS, because you've got to give that pancreas a break, and you have to help those receptors become much more sensitive, and you're not eating carbs all day long. And that will allow, number one, the burning of fat on the body, number two, the sensitizing of those receptors, and number three, when the insulin levels go down, the hormones for fertility go up. Now, one of the things is a lot of these women who have PCOS, if they can just lose 5 to 10% of their body weight, they can increase their chance of fertility. In some studies, it said up to 25%. So when we talk about the keto diet, And again, I don't recommend anybody go on any type of diet without talking to your doctor first. But again, if you're talking to your fertility doctor, you'll know a lot of your fertility doctors are going to recommend the keto diet for someone with PCOS. And if a person can't go strictly on the keto diet, they can go on a modified keto, which is that Cheeto that I talked about, where what you're eating only is very, very low levels of carbs. And usually you're looking at below 30 grams of carbs a day. But again, you definitely need to be talking to your doctor before any type of diet, especially when you're talking about fertility, because there's a lot of different things that your doctor could help to recommend to improve your chances of conceiving. So we already talked about this. Daily physical activity, even if it's just walking, will improve your sensitivity to insulin. And eating those low glycemic index foods, okay? And those are all those simple carbs, okay? You've got to keep all those simple carbs out of the diet. And even to some extent, you're going to lower, if you're a real big fruit eater, you're even going to lower the amount of fruit that you're eating in a day. So reduces carbs to less than 45% of all the calories that they eat in a day is typically what is recommended for someone with PCOS. So of course, fertility as well as pregnancy, vitamins, antioxidants are really, really needed. So you want to make sure you're getting the right amount of vitamins and the right amount of minerals in order to be able to produce the necessary ingredients that the body needs for fertility to take place. Because remember, again, fertility is all about the health of the egg, the health of the sperm, the ability for the two of them to get together. So you got to have a sex drive, okay? And then also for implantation. Now, remember, and we're not going to talk so much about this in this lecture, but because infertility issues are on the rise, you're going to see that the number of fertility doctors and fertility clinics and surrogates and all that kind of stuff are also on the rise. And all of this is about how to improve the ability of the egg and sperm to get together, and then even more so to improve implantation. Because if you don't have the right vitamins and nutrients, antioxidants in your diet, then that inner lining of the uterus is not going to be adequately healthy to support that embryo and to support that fetus in growing and becoming healthy. Now, one of the key vitamins that helps to improve fertility is folate. Okay, we've talked about folate. You know how important that is. But that also plays a big part in fertility. Now, it also plays a huge part in making sure that the fetus is healthy and growing. And if you ever take the pathophysiology class that I teach, we talk about what happens if a pregnant mom doesn't have enough folate in her diet and what is going to happen with that fetus. So remember that folate plays a big role in producing DNA, and so of course that plays a big role in producing eggs and sperm. Now, if I want to not take vitamins and I want to just have enough folate in my diet, remember leafy green vegetables, strawberries, orange juice, and then cereals, bread, certain products are fortified with certain B vitamins, especially folate. So dietary patterns rich in antioxidant nutrients are linked to improved fertility in both men and women. So making sure that you eat the foods that are high in antioxidants is extremely important, because those antioxidants, remember, they're going to keep the cells healthy, and that would be the egg, the sperm, the lining of the uterus. These are all things that need to stay healthy for this pregnancy to succeed. So anything that has high levels of vitamin E, C, selenium, zinc, beta carotene, and then of course we don't even know all the chemicals in the different plant products that we can eat. And one of the kind of sad things is the American diet is limited. We're not like a lot of other countries. You don't see a wide variety or as wide a variety of foods as we used to, because the farmer isn't growing them as much as we used to. And I think also Americans have kind of said, I only like certain foods, and so the farmer said, well, this is all I can sell, and so I've got to grow what the American likes to eat. So it's a little bit harder for us to get all the nutrients we need in our daily diet.